4 times in history, the world's money has died. It follows the exact same cycle.
There is a specific pattern in history, a nasty little recurring cycle that has destroyed every single global reserve currency. Not most of them, every single one. The Portuguese real dominated global trade for 80 years and then collapsed. The Dutch guilder ruled for 80 years and then fell. The British pound reigned for 105 years before it died. Each of them followed the same 7 stages. Each believed they were different, and each was wrong. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency in 1944. That was 81 years ago. If you're doing the math, you should be concerned because right now in 2025, the dollar is deep in stage 5 of this same 7-stage death spiral. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it is just mathematics and history on repeat. The only question that matters is whether we're smart enough to see what is coming or arrogant enough to believe that this time is different. Spoiler alert, it is never different. To understand where we're going, we have to look at the 7 stages of empire collapse, starting with stage 1, military dominance and trade route control. Every reserve currency begins with a big stick. You don't just ask other nations to use your money, you strongly suggest it with cannons. In the 1400s, Portugal figured out how to sail across oceans while everyone else was hugging the coastlines. They didn't just trade, they militarized the trade routes, building forts at every choke point from Africa to Asia. If you wanted spices, you paid Portugal, and you paid in reals. The Dutch did the same in the 1600s with the Dutch East India Company, which wasn't just a business, it was a military power with a stock ticker. Then the British Royal Navy turned the entire ocean into a toll road. The United States achieved this in 1945. The U.S. Navy dominates every ocean and controls every critical trade choke point from Hormuz to Malacca to the Suez Canal. We are effectively the bouncers of global trade, and that military control is the foundation that allows a currency to become the standard. We've had that checkmark for over 80 years. Once you control the roads, you get rich, which brings us to stage 2, a massive trade surplus. This is the accumulation of global wealth. Portugal bought spices for pennies and sold them for gold. The Dutch bought low in Asia and sold high in Europe. Britain became the workshop of the world, exporting steel and textiles to everyone while importing raw materials on their terms. The United States enjoyed this period from 1945 to 1970. We were the only major industrial power left standing after World War II. We made the cars, the fridges, and the steel. The world sent us gold, and we sent them goods, causing our vaults at Fort Knox to overflow. Life is incredibly good in stage 2 because you're productive, you're rich, and everyone wants to be you. However, getting rich eventually makes you lazy, which leads to the tipping point. Stage 3 is when reserve currency status is formalized. This is the moment the world officially admits that your money is the money. For Portugal, treaties were written in reals. For the Dutch, bills of exchange were written in guilders. For the U.S., this happened at the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, where 44 nations agreed that the dollar would be as good as gold, and every other currency would be a derivative of the dollar. This feels like the ultimate victory, but it is actually a trap. Once everyone needs your money to trade, you have to provide it to them. To get dollars into the hands of foreign nations so they can buy oil or conduct trade, the U.S. has to send dollars abroad. The only way to do that is to stop exporting goods and start exporting cash. You switch from being a seller to a buyer. This is called the Triffin dilemma. You cannot remain the world's reserve currency without eventually running a trade deficit. The moment you win the trophy, the rot begins and the seeds of destruction are sown. But stage 2 and 3 don't last forever. Eventually, the reserve currency nation stops producing wealth and starts consuming it. This is stage 4, deficit spending and living beyond your means. The trade surplus disappears and you start importing everything. Portugal stopped making things and just bought luxury goods with Brazilian gold. The Dutch stopped building ships and started banking, shifting from factories to finance. Britain stopped manufacturing and started living off investments. The United States entered stage 4 in 1971 when our trade surplus flipped to a deficit. Today, we import everything from electronics to textiles. We don't pay for it by making things, we pay for it by printing pieces of paper. We are effectively living on a credit card with no limit, signed by our great-grandchildren. We consume more than we produce, and because we hold the reserve currency, the world lets us get away with it for a while. But inevitably, when you spend more than you make for decades, the bills come due, leading to Stage 5, currency debasement and money printing. This is where we are right now. When deficits become unsustainable, politicians have two choices. Option A is to stop spending, endure a massive depression, and be responsible. Option B is to print money to cover the difference. Politicians always choose Option B because Option A gets you fired, while Option B kicks the can down the road. Portugal shaved silver off their coins, the Romans diluted their denarius, Britain printed pounds to pay for 2 world wars. In the US, we saw this explode in 2008 when we printed $3.5 trillion. Then, when COVID hit, we said hold my beer and printed another $7 trillion in 2 years. Roughly 40% of all US dollars in existence were created just since 2020. This is debasement. It is the reason your groceries cost 30% more than they did 3 years ago. It is not supply chains or corporate greed. It is the fact that the money in your pocket is being diluted. Stage 5 is the desperate measure phase, and it leads directly to the one thing a currency cannot survive losing, which is trust. This triggers Stage 6, loss of confidence and the search for alternatives. This is like a bad breakup where the world looks at the dollar and says, "It's not me, it's you." History shows us the signs clearly. When the Portuguese real died, merchants started asking for Spanish silver. When the pound died, banks started hoarding dollars. Today, central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace since 1967. They are literally backing up the truck to load up on bullion. China and Russia are settling trade in yuan. Saudi Arabia, the backbone of the petrodollar system, is open to accepting currencies other than the dollar for oil. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 72% to 58% in just 2 decades. That might not sound like a crash, but in the slow-moving world of global finance, that is a landslide. The world knows the US is addicted to debt and cannot stop printing, so they are quietly heading for the exit. They aren't shouting about it, they're just diversifying. This leads to the final phase, Stage 7, replacement and collapse. This doesn't happen overnight, until it does. For the Portuguese, the Spanish silver peso took over. For the Dutch, the British pound took the crown. For the British, the dollar took the throne. What replaces the dollar is the trillion-dollar question. China wants it to be the yuan, but nobody trusts their capital controls. The euro is a structural mess. It will likely be a messy, multipolar transition where we use a mix of regional currencies, crypto, and gold. But for you, the person holding dollars, Stage 7 is painful. When the reserve currency collapses, the purchasing power of the people holding it evaporates. The British middle class was decimated after World War II because their savings bought nothing. If the dollar loses its status, all those cheap imports become luxury goods. Inflation isn't a temporary spike, it becomes a permanent lifestyle. We are at the tail end of an 80-year cycle, staring down the barrel of Stage 6. I'm not saying the dollar dies tomorrow, but the trend is undeniable. You need to understand that holding 100% of your wealth in dollars is a risk, not a safety net. You need to diversify into real assets, things the Federal Reserve cannot print, like real estate, profitable businesses, commodities, and gold. Watch the signs, specifically central bank gold buying and trade deals. The pattern has played out 4 times in the last 600 years. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, they all thought they were special and that their empire would last forever. It never does. The mathematics of debt doesn't care about American exceptionalism. The cycle is turning, so make sure you're on the right side of it.